The day my daughter-in-law threw a mop at my feet and told me to stop pretending to be sick, something inside me finally cracked. I was dizzy, barely standing, and the floor was still wet from when I collapsed earlier. But she did not see a struggling woman. She saw a servant who was moving too slowly. My son stood nearby and said nothing. In that moment, I realized I was no longer a mother in this house. I was labor. I was invisible. And if I did not leave, I would lose more than my health. I would lose myself. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I am 67 years old. 8 years have passed since my husband died, yet the quiet he left behind still follows me everywhere. After his funeral, I sold our small house in Oklahoma, the one we had worked for our entire lives, and packed what little I owned into a few suitcases. My son Ethan asked me to come live with his family in Plano, Texas. He said it would be easier for all of us, that I would not have to be alone anymore. I believed him. I even brought along my entire savings to help them buy a bigger home, thinking that this was what mothers were supposed to do. The house was modern and spacious, with bright windows and a clean white exterior. But there was no real room for me. My bedroom was the old laundry space behind the kitchen, just large enough for a narrow bed, a folding chair, and a small dresser. There was no window, only the soft humming of the washing machine to keep me company at night. Brenda, my daughter-in-law, had a master bedroom with a walk-in closet and a private bathroom. I never complained. I told myself that comfort was not important anymore. Every day began at 5 in the morning. I prepared breakfast, packed Noah's school lunch, and cleaned the kitchen before the sun was fully up. After that came the laundry, the floors, the bathrooms, and the endless small tasks that kept the house running. Brenda did not work, yet she rarely lifted a finger. Ethan left early and came home late, always tired, always distracted. By the time evening arrived, my back ached and my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. My doctor had warned me about my blood pressure and joint pain, but rest was a luxury I no longer had. Brenda never called me Mom. She used my first name, sharp and distant, as if we were strangers. Nothing I did ever seemed right. The food was too salty one day and too bland the next. The floors were never clean enough. If I sat down for even a few minutes, she would look at me as if I were wasting her time. Her tone made it clear that I was not family in her eyes. I was help. Ethan noticed more than he admitted, but he chose silence. When Brenda complained, he avoided eye contact. When I looked to him for support, he changed the subject. I told myself that he was just trying to keep peace in his marriage. Still, the silence hurt more than the words. What hurt the most was watching Noah change. My sweet grandson had once followed me everywhere, holding my hand and asking for stories. Now he spoke to me without warmth, copying his mother's sharp tone. Children learn quickly, especially when disrespect is treated like normal behavior. I tried not to take it personally, but the distance felt like a small cut to the heart each day. At night, when the house finally grew quiet, I lay in my narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. The walls felt closer than they used to, and the air heavier. I reminded myself why I stayed. Family mattered. Sacrifice was part of being a mother. I had endured harder times in my life, and I could endure this too. But somewhere deep inside, A quiet crack had begun to form. It was not loud or dramatic. It was simply the slow realization that I no longer belonged in the place I had helped build. And even though I continued to wake up at dawn and fulfill every duty expected of me, a part of me was already searching for a way to breathe again. If you're still watching and already feeling the weight of her situation, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Things are about to get much harder, and the real conflict is just beginning. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. Life in Ethan's house slowly became quieter, not in a peaceful way, but in a careful, cautious way. I learned to walk softly, to close doors gently, and to keep my voice low. Every sound felt like it could trigger annoyance, especially from Brenda. The warmth I once expected from family life never arrived. Instead, the house felt more like a workplace, and I was the only employee who never clocked out. Brenda's attitude toward me grew sharper with each passing week. She never used the word mom, not even by accident. My name came out of her mouth clipped and cold, as if she were addressing someone hired through an agency. When I set breakfast on the table, she inspected it in silence, her eyes moving from plate to plate. If the eggs were too dry or the toast slightly burned, her sigh said more than any words. I stopped asking what she preferred. It never mattered anyway. Her requests were never phrased as favors. They were instructions. The floors needed mopping again. The laundry basket was too full. Noah's room looked messy. Even when my back ached or my hands trembled from fatigue, I kept moving. Resting felt dangerous, as if it might invite criticism. When I finally sat down for a moment, Brenda's eyes followed me, measuring how long I stayed still. Ethan noticed these moments, but he avoided them like fragile glass. He stayed in his office longer, answered calls that did not seem urgent, and left the room whenever tension filled the air. I waited for him to say something, anything, that might remind me I was still his mother, but silence became his habit. I told myself he was tired, that marriage was complicated, that he did not mean to hurt me. Still, the absence of his voice felt heavier than the sharpest words. Noah changed too. He no longer asked to sit beside me or follow me around the kitchen. He spoke to me the way his mother did, short and careless, without the sweetness he once had. Children learn from what they see, and what he saw was a woman who served and stayed quiet. My body struggled to keep up with my responsibilities. Some mornings, the room spun when I stood up. My joints felt stiff, and a dull pressure rested behind my eyes. The doctor had warned me about overworking myself, but I never found the right moment to slow down. There was always another task waiting, another room that needed attention. At night, I lay awake in the small laundry room, listening to the distant sounds of the house. The hum of appliances replaced the laughter that once filled my life. I thought about the home I had sold, the quiet evenings I used to share with my husband, and the sense of belonging I once knew. Here, I felt invisible, necessary, but invisible. I reminded myself of the reasons I stayed. Family was supposed to mean sacrifice. Mothers were supposed to endure. I had survived harder times before, and I told myself this was just another chapter of patience. Still, the loneliness crept in slowly, settling into my chest like a weight I could not lift. Somewhere inside me, a small voice began to whisper questions I was afraid to answer. How long could I keep living like this? When did support turn into silence? And at what point did helping others mean losing myself? I did not speak these thoughts aloud. I folded them away with the laundry, hidden and quiet. But they stayed with me, growing heavier each day, waiting for the moment when endurance would no longer be enough. If you're still here and starting to sense how dangerous this environment is becoming for her, comment number 2 below so I know you're following the story. What happens next will change everything. Now let's move on to chapter 3. That morning began like every other. I woke before the sun, my joints stiff and my head already aching. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. I filled a bucket with warm water and cleaning solution, tied an old towel around my waist, and started mopping the living room floor. The smell of soap mixed with the scent of yesterday's dinner, and for a moment, I focused only on the steady motion of the mop, trying to ignore the dull pressure behind my eyes. As I moved across the tiles, the room suddenly tilted. My vision blurred and the handle slipped slightly in my hands. Before I could steady myself, the bucket tipped over. Water rushed across the floor, spreading in every direction. I grabbed the wall to keep from falling, my heart pounding harder than it should have. Brenda's footsteps echoed from the hallway. She stopped at the edge of the living room and stared at the mess. There was no concern in her eyes, no question about whether I was all right. Her lips tightened as if she had just found something unpleasant. She bent down, picked up the mop, and tossed it toward me. It landed at my feet with a wet thud. "Stop pretending to be sick. Clean the floor." Her voice cut through the air like a slap. I stood there for a moment, frozen. My hands were shaking, not just from the dizziness, but from the humiliation. I felt my face grow warm as I slowly bent down to pick up the mop. The water soaked into my shoes, and I could feel it seeping into the hem of my skirt. Ethan had stepped into the room by then. He looked from the spilled water to Brenda's tense posture and then to me. His eyes lingered for a brief second, but he said nothing meaningful. He simply told me not to make a scene and walked away. His footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving the silence even heavier than before. Noah stood nearby, watching. A small laugh escaped his mouth, light and careless. He did not understand the weight of the moment, only that his mother seemed in control, and I did not. I lowered my head and began wiping the floor inch by inch. My reflection stared back at me from the wet tiles, older and smaller than I remembered. In that moment, I did not feel like a mother or a grandmother. I felt like a piece of furniture that had been moved out of place. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I finished the cleaning, prepared lunch, and retreated to my small room when no one needed me anymore. My chest felt tight, as if something inside had cracked open. That evening, as the house grew quiet, I heard Brenda's voice drifting from the living room. I had gone to the kitchen for a glass of water and stopped when I realized she was on the phone. Her tone was low, confident, and sharp. She spoke about selling a few of my old belongings online. She laughed about how easy it was to get rid of things that no one would miss. Then her voice changed, growing more serious as she mentioned nursing homes and financial assistance. She talked about how much money could be saved if I were not living under their roof. I stood there in the shadows, gripping my glass so tightly my fingers hurt. Every word felt heavier than the last. This was not just disrespect. This was a plan. When she ended the call, I slipped quietly back to my room, my heart pounding in my ears. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, staring at the wall. For years, I had told myself that silence was patience and endurance was love. But now I saw something I could no longer ignore. The woman who had thrown a mop at me did not see me as family. She saw me as an obstacle, and the son who had looked away was no longer protecting me. That night, I did not sleep. I lay awake, listening to the washing machine hum beside me, and for the first time, I allowed myself to think of a life beyond this house. The floor might have been clean again, but something inside me was finally breaking free. If this chapter made your heart tighten, comment number 3 below to show your support. The situation is about to cross a line that can't be undone. Let's continue to chapter 4. After the incident with the mop, the house returned to its usual rhythm, as if nothing unusual had happened. Brenda moved through the rooms with her familiar sharp confidence, giving instructions and complaints in the same tone she always used. Ethan went back to his long work hours. Noah watched television and played on his tablet. On the surface, everything looked normal, but inside me, something had shifted. I tried to speak with Ethan one evening when Brenda was not around. My voice felt small in the quiet kitchen. I mentioned my dizziness, my aching joints, and how tired I had been feeling lately. I also told him gently that the way Brenda treated me hurt. He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and told me not to make things bigger than they were. He said Brenda was stressed and did not mean any harm. Then he changed the subject and walked away. His words felt like a closed door. That night, I lay awake in my narrow laundry room, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of disappointment. My son no longer saw me as someone who needed protection. I was simply part of the background of his life. Over the next few days, I began to move quietly, with purpose. I started searching through old drawers and boxes whenever the house was empty. I gathered my personal documents, including my medical records, my identification, and the bank statements I could still access. I found letters my husband had written to me years ago and placed them carefully in a small folder. Each piece of paper felt like a reminder of who I used to be before my life became defined by cleaning schedules. One afternoon, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Several financial documents no longer listed my name as a primary account holder. Brenda's name appeared instead. I read the lines again and again, hoping I had misunderstood. But the truth was clear. Control had been taken from me without my knowledge. The memory of Brenda's phone call returned to me in sharp detail. The way she had spoken about nursing homes and money, the way she laughed. I imagined myself in a small room somewhere unfamiliar, with strangers deciding my daily routine. The thought filled me with a quiet panic I could not shake. My body continued to struggle. One morning, while sorting laundry, my vision darkened. The room spun, and I sank onto the floor, my heart racing. I waited, listening for footsteps, but none came. After a few minutes, I forced myself to stand and called a taxi. The driver helped me into the car without questions. At the clinic, I sat alone in a plastic chair, staring at the wall while the nurse took my blood pressure. The doctor warned me about stress and exhaustion. He told me to rest more. I nodded politely, but inside, I knew rest was not something my current life allowed. As I left the clinic, the Texas sun felt too bright. I stood on the sidewalk, holding my purse close to my chest, and realized something important. No one in that house was truly watching out for me anymore. If I wanted safety, dignity, and peace, I would have to create them myself. That evening, I returned to the laundry room and looked around carefully. The narrow bed, the stacked boxes, the humming machine. This was not a home. It was a space I had been allowed to occupy as long as I was useful. I began to plan in silence. I did not tell anyone. I packed only what mattered most, hiding my belongings in small sections so no one would notice. I kept my movements calm and my expression neutral. To Brenda and Ethan, I was still the quiet woman who cleaned the floors and made the meals. But inside, I was already leaving. Each night, as the house grew quiet, I reminded myself that endurance was no longer enough. I deserved more than survival. I deserved to live. If you're still watching and you feel the tension building, comment number 4 below to let me know you're here. A major turning point is coming, and nothing will be the same after it. Now, let's move on to Chapter 5. I left the house in Plano before dawn, moving as quietly as I had learned to do over the years. My suitcase was light, filled only with the documents I had gathered, a few changes of clothes, and the letters my husband once wrote to me. I did not leave a note. Words had already failed me too many times. As the front door closed behind me, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief, like stepping out of a long shadow. The drive to Fredericksburg felt longer than it was. The Texas highway stretched wide and open, framed by fields and low hills that glowed softly in the morning light. With every mile, memories returned. My husband and I had once driven this same road together, laughing about small things, dreaming about the future. He had loved this town. It was where we built our life, where our bakery had once filled the air with the smell of fresh bread and sweet pastries. When I reached the old street, my heart tightened. The bakery stood at the corner, quiet and dusty, its sign faded by years of sun and rain. The windows were cloudy, and the paint on the door was peeling. Weeds had grown along the sidewalk where customers used to line up. Still, when I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar shape of the space wrapped around me like a gentle memory. The ovens were old, but they were still there. The counters were scratched, but solid. Sunlight slipped through the dusty windows, touching the empty shelves where rows of bread once stood. I closed my eyes and could almost hear my husband's voice, steady and calm, guiding me through each recipe. I did not have a grand plan. I only knew that I wanted to work with my hands again, to create something that belonged to me. I cleaned the floors, wiped down the counters, and opened the windows wide. The smell of dust slowly faded, replaced by fresh air and possibility. My first batches of bread were simple, nothing fancy, just warm loaves made from recipes I had memorized long ago. I shared them with neighbors, offering slices with quiet smiles. Some of the older residents recognized the flavors immediately. Their faces softened with nostalgia, and their kind words filled the empty spaces inside me. Soon, people began stopping by more often. They told their friends. Word traveled faster than I expected. The bakery, once forgotten, began to breathe again. I named it Margaret's Heritage Bakery, a tribute to the life my husband and I had built together. Each morning, I arrived early, tying my apron with steady hands. I felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired. No one ordered me around. No one judged how long I rested. Customers greeted me with warmth instead of criticism. They asked about the recipes, about the history of the place, about me. For the first time in years, I felt seen. In the quiet moments, I still missed my husband. I missed the way he used to lean against the counter, watching the dough rise. But the sadness no longer felt heavy. It felt like part of a story that had shaped me, not broken me. As days turned into weeks, the bakery grew busier. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the street again, just like it used to. Some mornings, I stood in the doorway and watched people walk in with curious smiles, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. I was no longer the invisible woman in the laundry room. I was not someone waiting for approval or permission. I was simply Margaret, a woman rebuilding her life one loaf at a time. And for the first time, the future did not feel like something to endure. It felt like something to welcome. The bakery had grown busier than I ever imagined. Each morning, the smell of warm bread drifted down the street, and familiar faces appeared at the door before I even finished arranging the display. Some customers came for the flavors they remembered from years ago, while others were simply curious about the small shop that everyone was talking about. The steady flow of people gave me a sense of purpose I had not felt in a long time. My hands were tired, but my heart felt full. News of the bakery's success eventually reached Plano. I did not know exactly how, but I was not surprised. Brenda had always paid close attention to anything that involved money. One afternoon, just as I was closing the shop early to rest my aching feet, two unfamiliar cars pulled up outside. My stomach tightened when I recognized Ethan and Brenda stepping out. They walked in as if they still owned the place. Brenda's eyes scanned the shelves, the counters, the ovens, all with a calculating look. Ethan tried to smile, but it did not reach his eyes. Their sudden interest felt less like concern and more like inspection. Before they arrived, something else had already happened. Earlier that week, a local inspector had visited the bakery. He mentioned that a few permits needed updating and that some paperwork was missing. The issues were minor, but enough to force a temporary pause in operations. I handled the situation calmly, knowing I could fix it. Still, the timing felt too convenient. Brenda wasted no time getting to the point. She spoke about how difficult it must be for me to manage everything alone, especially at my age. She mentioned the inspection, the rules, the risks. Ethan added that they could help me handle the business side of things, the paperwork, the finances. They said it would be safer if the bakery were officially under their control. I listened quietly, my hands resting on the counter that my husband and I had once built together. Their words sounded polished, but I recognized the same tone Brenda used when she talked about selling my belongings behind my back. This was not about protecting me. It was about owning what I had rebuilt. Brenda's voice grew sharper as she spoke about efficiency and profit. She hinted that I should focus on baking while they handled everything else. Ethan tried to make it sound gentle, saying it was only to reduce my stress. But I remembered the laundry room, the mop on the floor, and the silence that followed. For years, I had allowed others to speak for me. I had accepted instructions instead of respect. But standing there in my own bakery, surrounded by the work of my hands, I felt something different rise inside me. I told them no. The word felt strange on my tongue, but also powerful. I explained that the bakery belonged to me, that I was capable of managing it, and that I did not need anyone to take control of my life again. My voice was steady, even though my heart raced. Brenda's expression hardened instantly. Her polite mask slipped, revealing the irritation beneath. She scoffed, muttering about how stubborn I was being. Ethan looked uncomfortable, as if he had not expected me to refuse so firmly. They exchanged glances, and without another word, they turned and walked out. The door closed behind them with a quiet finality. I stood there alone in the bakery, my hands trembling slightly. Part of me felt scared, knowing that Brenda rarely accepted defeat gracefully. But another part of me felt something stronger than fear. Relief. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself over silence. I had protected what I built, not just the bakery, but my sense of dignity. The air in the room felt lighter, even though I knew the calm would not last forever. As I locked up for the evening, I looked at the sign above the door, glowing softly in the fading light. Margaret's Heritage Bakery. It was more than a name. It was a promise to myself. Whatever came next, I would face it standing tall. If you're still with me and shocked by what just happened, comment number 6 below. The consequences of this moment are about to hit hard. Let's move on to chapter 7. The atmosphere in town changed almost overnight. Where neighbors once greeted me with warm smiles and friendly waves, I now received cautious glances and polite silence. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Whispers followed me down the street. I did not need anyone to explain what was happening. I could feel it in the air. The rumors spread quietly at first, then louder. People said my bakery was unsanitary. They claimed someone had gotten sick from my bread. Others whispered that I was too old to run a business and that I should have stayed home instead of trying to start something new. No one came to ask me for the truth. The story had already been written for them. Inside the bakery, the change was just as painful. The morning rush grew thinner. Some regular customers stopped coming altogether. A few of the part-time helpers told me they had found other work. They did not say why, but I understood. No one wanted to be associated with a business surrounded by doubt. I responded the only way I knew how. I worked harder. I arrived before sunrise and stayed long after the streetlights turned on. I scrubbed every surface until my hands were raw. I double-checked every ingredient, every tray, every oven setting. I told myself that if I proved my dedication, people would see the truth. But my body was no longer strong enough to match my determination. The fatigue settled deep in my bones. My chest felt tight, and sometimes it was hard to catch my breath. I brushed it off as stress and exhaustion. There was too much to do, too much at stake. Rest felt like a luxury I could not afford. One morning, as I was arranging fresh loaves on the counter, a sharp pain shot through my chest. The room seemed to shrink around me. My vision blurred, and the smell of warm bread suddenly felt overwhelming. I tried to steady myself, gripping the edge of the counter, but my legs would not respond. The floor rushed up to meet me. When I opened my eyes, bright white lights burned into my vision. The steady beeping of a monitor filled the room. I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and sterile walls. My chest felt heavy, and a dull ache pulsed beneath my ribs. A doctor explained that I had suffered a stress-related cardiac episode. My heart had not failed, but it had come dangerously close. He spoke about exhaustion, emotional strain, and the need for rest. His words blurred together as I stared at the ceiling, trying to process how quickly everything had changed. Lying there, I felt smaller than I ever had before. The bakery, the rumors, the fear of losing everything I had rebuilt. It all pressed down on me at once. I wondered if I had been foolish to believe I could start over at my age. Maybe the voices were right. Maybe I had pushed too far. No one from my old life came to see me. There were no messages, no concern, no apologies. The silence was loud and unmistakable. Alone in the hospital room, I stared at my hands resting on the thin blanket. These hands had baked thousands of loaves, cleaned countless floors, and carried the weight of a family that never noticed how tired I was. Now they trembled slightly, no longer as steady as they once were. For the first time since reopening the bakery, doubt crept into my heart. Had I made a mistake? Was my desire for independence worth the cost of my health? Was it too late to protect what little strength I had left? The room felt colder as the evening light faded through the window. I closed my eyes, listening to the soft rhythm of the monitor, and tried to gather the pieces of myself that still believed in the life I was fighting for. Somewhere beyond the walls of the hospital, my bakery stood silent, waiting, and so did my future. Recovery was slow. My body felt fragile, as if even the smallest movement might break something inside me. The hospital room smelled faintly of disinfectant and quiet patience. I spent most of my days staring out the window, watching clouds drift past, wondering what was happening to the bakery while I lay there powerless. One afternoon, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Mrs. Turner, an older woman who lived 2 streets away from the bakery and had been one of my earliest supporters. She brought a small bouquet of wildflowers and a look of careful concern. She sat beside my bed and spoke gently, choosing her words as if they carried weight. The town, she said, was beginning to understand what had really happened. The rumors about my bakery had not come from dissatisfied customers or health officials. They had started with phone calls, repeated ones, calls from someone claiming to be a worried resident, warning people that my bread was unsafe, that I was cutting corners, that my age made me careless. The name behind those calls was not a stranger. It was Brenda. My chest tightened, not with shock, but with a heavy sense of recognition. The pattern was familiar. When control slipped from her hands, she found other ways to pull the strings. Mrs. Turner explained that a few shop owners had compared notes and realized the same voice had contacted them all. Once the truth began to surface, the story started to unravel. Brenda had not only wanted to damage my reputation, she wanted to corner me, to leave me with no choice but to return to Plano, dependent and silent once again. The bakery was never the problem. My independence was. When Mrs. Turner left, the room felt quieter than before. I stared at the flowers on the table, their soft colors a sharp contrast to the bitterness settling in my chest. The betrayal hurt, but what hurt more was how unsurprising it felt. I had seen this kind of control before, dressed in different words. Later that evening, Ethan came. He arrived alone, his shoulders slumped, his eyes tired. He did not carry the confidence he once had. Instead, he looked like a man who had been awake too long with thoughts he could no longer ignore. He did not speak right away. He stood near the foot of my bed, his hands clasped together, as if unsure where to place them. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and strained. He admitted that he knew what Brenda had done. He had known about the calls, the rumors, the pressure, and he had done nothing to stop it. The words did not anger me. They only deepened the disappointment already resting in my heart. I told him the truth calmly, that what hurt most was not Brenda's cruelty, but his silence. A son's silence carries more weight than any insult. For years, I had stood alone in the spaces where support should have been. This moment was simply another echo of that absence. Ethan listened, his face tightening with something close to regret. For the first time, he seemed to understand the cost of looking away. He spoke less and thought more. When he finally left, his steps were slower, as if each one carried the weight of reflection. Alone again, I turned my gaze toward the window. The sky was turning gold as the sun lowered behind the buildings. Despite everything, a quiet strength stirred inside me. The truth was out now. And I was no longer the woman who stayed silent when the floor was pulled from beneath her. If you're still watching and ready to see how everything finally turns out, comment number 8 below. The truth is out, and now it's time for the final chapter of this journey. Let's move on to the ending. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, my body still felt weak, but my spirit was steadier than it had been in months. The nurses reminded me to rest, to move slowly, and to avoid stress. I nodded and thanked them, knowing that my recovery would be as much about my heart as it was about my health. Returning to Fredericksburg felt like coming home in the truest sense. The familiar streets, the quiet charm of the town, and the soft rhythm of daily life welcomed me back. When I reached the bakery, I paused for a moment before unlocking the door. The sign still hung proudly above the entrance, weathered but strong, much like me. Inside, the space felt peaceful. The ovens were clean, the counters polished, and the shelves ready to be filled again. I took a deep breath and began preparing the dough, moving carefully but confidently. The scent of fresh bread soon drifted through the air, carrying with it a sense of renewal. Word spread quickly that I had returned. Neighbors stopped by with gentle smiles and quiet apologies. Some admitted they had believed the rumors. Others simply said they were glad to see me standing again. Their honesty, though painful, helped mend the silence that had once surrounded me. As the truth about Brenda's actions became more widely known, the whispers faded. My reputation slowly recovered, and so did my sense of belonging. Customers returned, not just for the bread, but to show support. Each familiar face reminded me that kindness still existed, even after betrayal. A few of my former helpers came back as well. They greeted me with warm words and willing hands. The bakery felt alive again, filled with the gentle sounds of work and quiet laughter. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel alone in the process. Ethan visited one afternoon, standing quietly near the doorway. His presence felt different this time. There was no pressure, no excuses, only a soft understanding. He did not say much, but his eyes carried something new: respect. I did not need long conversations or grand apologies. What mattered was the change in how he looked at me, not as someone fragile, but as someone strong. As the days passed, my strength slowly returned. I learned to balance rest with purpose, to care for myself the way I had once cared for everyone else. Standing in front of the bakery one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in warm colors, I felt a calm certainty settle in my heart. I had fallen, but I had risen again. Mornings at the bakery were different now. I no longer rushed through the doors with tension in my shoulders or worry in my chest. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting the rhythm of the day guide me instead of pressure. The ovens warmed the room with a steady glow, and the scent of fresh bread filled the air with calm familiarity. For the first time in years, I felt present in my own life. As I kneaded the dough, my hands remembered every motion without strain. There was no one watching to criticize, no voice waiting to remind me of what I should or should not be doing. The work belonged to me, and so did the peace that came with it. Sometimes, I paused to look around the bakery and reflect on the path that had brought me here. I had once been a quiet figure in the background of someone else's household, measuring my worth by how useful I could be. My days had been filled with responsibility, but emptied of recognition. I existed to serve, not to live. That version of me felt distant now. What changed was not just my surroundings, but my understanding of myself. I learned that endurance alone is not strength. True strength comes from knowing when to step away, when to protect your dignity, and when to choose your own well-being over silence. Age had taught me many things, but the most important lesson was this: growing older does not mean becoming invisible. It does not mean surrendering your voice or your value. A lifetime of experience is not a burden. It is a foundation. Independence, I discovered, is not about proving something to others. It is about giving yourself permission to live honestly, to rest without guilt, to speak without fear, to build something that reflects who you are, not what others expect you to be. The bakery was never just about bread. It was about reclaiming space in my own story. It was about choosing respect over convenience and self-worth over quiet obedience. Some afternoons, I stood in the doorway and watched the sunlight spill across the sidewalk. People passed by with gentle smiles, unaware of the battles that had once shaped this place. They saw a simple bakery. I saw a symbol of resilience. There was no need to explain myself anymore, no need to justify the choices I had made. Peace came not from approval, but from acceptance. As the day faded into evening, I locked the door and rested my hand on the warm wood for a moment. The quiet around me felt earned, not empty. Life had tested me, but it had also taught me how to stand again. And in that quiet strength, I finally found what I had been searching for all along. In the end, the journey was never just about survival. It was about rediscovering self-worth after years of being overlooked, unheard, and underestimated. It was about learning that strength does not always roar. Sometimes, it speaks quietly through resilience, dignity, and the courage to walk away from what no longer serves the soul. True freedom comes from honoring one's own value, setting boundaries, and choosing peace over approval. Age does not erase purpose. Experience does not diminish relevance. Every chapter of life holds the power to begin again, no matter how late the season may seem. When self-respect becomes the foundation, even the most painful past can transform into a future filled with calm confidence and quiet pride. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, please share your thoughts in the comments. Do not forget to like, follow, and subscribe for more meaningful stories. Your support truly matters.